We love Brian too. And so all of the tellers, we got together, Brian, and we have something that we want to do for you. And Bill's going to take us through.
Okay, so Brian, actually one of the things that's great about Brian is that he pays us. Brian is a dear
don't
friend.
Don't count on it, Bill.
Ooh, I should have gotten a check first. Okay, so we said, what can we do? What can we give to Brian? You know, and because we've been paid, as you can imagine, as storytellers, each of us have this incredible retirement account. And so what we thought we'd do is we'd just get together, and we didn't know what to do, so we said, let's just give him some money, and that he can spend any way he wants. So we're going to just give him a big pot of money that he can spend, and we're just actually going to do it in front of you so you're aware of. Okay, guys. Robert, come on, man. Come on. Whoa, that's a... We love you, man. We love you.
You know, when I went to Spain, they all chipped in too. This is a lot more money than that. Anyway, it's been my great joy to have started this festival and kept it going these 20 years. Had a lot of help. And I wanted to tell you that last 2 years ago, I was at a fundraiser with Antonio Hosha. And I had told friends that I was going to retire. And a woman came up to me and she said, I hear you're going to retire. And I said, yeah, I would love to run the Storytelling Festival. So we've all had a wonderful gift, and her name is Kara Lakes. Come on, Kara. And Kara's been coming to the festival since she was 5 years old. And she's going to bring a lot of great things to the festival, and I'm so happy. I know it's going to be in really good hands. But I did want to say that if you would like to really help the festival during this weekend, if you can give some kind of a gift, hopefully more than what I got, to keep the festival going. So our new director, Kara Lakes.
About Brian, because many of you don't know him or where he started. And he actually started as a kindergarten teacher in Oakview. And from there, he went on into Canada and did a teacher exchange with Fulbright teacher exchange. And somebody came here, and Brian went to Canada for 2 years. And when he came back from Canada, he started teaching kindergarten again at Sheridan School down in Ventura. And while he was a kindergarten teacher, he started using story tapes of Donald Davis and David Holt and Bill Harley. And the county saw what a great thing it was Brian was doing, and they asked him if he would be a teacher on leave and become a mentor, a fine arts mentor for the county. So Brian did that, and he began assemblies. And he did them first of all at his school, and then to raise money for the performers who came. And we had people like Charlotte Diamond, Raffi, Sharon Lowson Bram, I don't know, so many. He even brought in the Minneapolis Children's Theater, who would come in with a truck, a semi-truck with lights and sound and stage. And anyway, to raise money for the assemblies that he was doing at school, he started to do them publicly. And so we started PTGO in 1995. And 5 years later, he was talking to our Donald Davis and said to Donald, Donald, do you think Ojai would be a good place for a storytelling festival? And Donald said, yes, it would, Brian. It would be an excellent place for a storytelling festival. And so it began with a few volunteers and a lot of hard work. And we've had an excellent working board for these many years, a backstage crew, and as you can imagine, a lot of volunteers. I've been one of the producers of the festival now for many years. I moved to Ojai 20 years ago, and I saw an ad 19 years ago in the Ojai paper that said, if you'd be interested in volunteering for the Storytelling Festival, come to Ojai Coffee Roasting. And I went, and that was 19 years ago, and we've been working together ever since, along with we brought my friend Martha Etchard on about 10 years ago, and we've been working together. So many things happen in a festival, and we got together on Monday and started talking about memories, and oh my goodness, just the funny things that happen, like jokes that go bad on stage, like Donald Davison, a little moose that was visiting one time, really bad jokes. We've had the bossy come, the sexy come, we've had propositions, we've had, you name it, things that happen backstage it's a very interesting group. We've had people that don't want to leave their pants on, like Bill Harley, and it's just a lot of different things. So we've received a ton of encouragement from the tellers, mostly, oh my goodness, they're just a really encouraging group of people. And of course, Brian and I have had thousands of conversations over coffee, lots of cups of coffee and lots of red wine, probably equal. And in fact, when we got together this week for coffee, we both felt a little bit teary-eyed because it is the kind of the end and the beginning. But we've been working with Kara now. She came on board right before COVID and followed us around. And we've been meeting now for forever because of COVID. And we're really excited that she has chosen to take on this really big job, and we understand that it's a tough one. And this weekend you worked pretty hard, haven't you? Yes, very, very hard. So, Brian, we know that you and Alex have some wonderful plans for the future, and finally we can announce that Brian and I are not married. I have a husband of 38 years who's in the audience, and Brian has a lovely Alex, and they have plans to travel and just enjoy each other's company. But we wanted you to be a part of it. So how do you make a big group like this do a corporate thank you?
Well, it's a family, not corporate.
Well, no, a corporate thank you. You're the family. I want to do a corporate thank you. We are going to do thank you notes. And so I've got one here for each of you. It says, Brian, thanks for, and I would like you to write whatever it is you want to say. And Martha and I will be around with these big orange boxes. Take a blank one, put in a full one, take as many as you want. And if you're watching us online, please send us an email and send us your thank you.
Thanks so much. Let's hear some stories.
What he is, because he makes us laugh, and he turns the world upside down. So please welcome Mr. Bill Epp.
All right, we'll just leave it there. I grew up in a little tiny town called Half Dollar, West Virginia. We had two streets in Half Dollar. One was called Main Street. The other one, I'm pretty sure was called, nah, that ain't Main Street. And we had a Methodist church, and then your sort of variety pack of Baptist churches. And our parents told us there were some Catholics that lived over the hill. But we didn't know if that was true, or if that was just something they told us so we'd go to bed at night. But my buddy Skeeter and I loved the Half Dollar Baptist Church. Now, when I say we loved the Baptist Church, I mean we loved the building that was the Baptist Church, because we were Methodists. But the attic of the Half Dollar Baptist Church was infested with bats. And on a spring evening, a summer evening, a fall evening, you could go and sit behind the Baptist church and just watch thousands and thousands of bats flying out of the eaves, flying out of the steeple. It was a beautiful sight to see. So Skeeter and I were very excited when it was announced that because they were doing renovations at the Methodist church, that we would be having a joint vacation Bible school at the Baptist church. And we were excited for several reasons. One, we had lots of Baptist friends. But it was difficult to tell the Baptist children from the Methodist children on the playground, because we all knew the same bad words. So we were excited to have the opportunity to see the Baptist children being Baptist in their natural Baptist habitat. On top of that, we had never been in the Baptist church, but we understood that in the Baptist church they had a baptismal, like a big bathtub where they did the baptisms. Now, when you're a Methodist and you get baptized, you just get a little bit of water sprinkled on your head. But when you're a Baptist, you know, you get the full bore dunking. And I asked my dad why that was, and he said that's because Methodists just have dirty minds. But the Baptists are dirty all over. And then, again, when you're a Methodist, you know, you usually get baptized as an infant. You really don't have anything to do with it whatsoever. And then there's no rebaptism in the Methodist church. But we understood that there were Baptists who got baptized like once a week. So we were excited to have the opportunity to see that. So we got to the Baptist church on the first day, and the little old ladies that were running the Vacation Bible School put the boys on one side of the sanctuary and the girls on the other, and we sang some hymns, and right away you could tell the Methodist kids from the Baptist kids, because the Baptist kids knew the words. The Methodist kids were looking for the hymnals, and then there was a devotional, and then it came time to give the offering. But instead of passing the plates in the traditional fashion, what happened was the boys got up and stood against this wall, the girls stood against this wall. We progressed forward, and someone had built in front of the altar an offering-giving device, the likes of which I had never seen before and have never seen since. It was a 2x4 about this tall. And then another 2x4 bolted perpendicularly across it, loosely. And on one side, tied on by binder's twine, was a coffee can, painted pink. And on this side, tied on by binder's twine, was a coffee can painted blue. And the boys put their money in this can, and the girls put their money in this can, and whichever side went down, that gender won the offering. Yeah. There's a lot wrong with that. And if you feel uncomfortable, it's justified. See, part of the problem is that the weight of American money has very little to do with the value of American money, right? I mean, a nickel is twice the size of a dime, but it's only worth half as much. Just ask Brian. And, I mean, 10 pennies weighs more than a $100 bill. Me and Skeeter knew that firsthand because that winter there'd been a blizzard. And we decided that we were going to go out into the neighborhood and shovel snow to make a little bit of extra money. Now, I grew up in the 1970s. I'm the last of 5 children, which means I did not own a new article of clothing until I was 27 years old. And the worst part about that was my 2 closest siblings were my sisters, right? So I was trans before trans was cool. And so we didn't have winter boots. We had thin rubber rain boots with little metal clasps to make them tighter. And mine were 3 sizes too big because they were from my oldest brother. So to render them winter-proof, my mother would put 2 wool socks on each foot, and then she would put space-age, state-of-the-art Wonder Bread bags on each foot, slap them shut with a rubber band. And so thusly clad, Skeeter and I headed out, and my mother was like, go, knock on doors, strangers' doors. If they invite you in, by all means, enter their houses. If they offer you food and drink, take it, say please, they say thank you, see you when you get home, or not. You're the last of 5, we might not notice. And so Skeeter and I went, and this immediately went from not just an exercise and occupation, but also sort of a sociology experiment, because we would knock on a door, and if the man of the house answered the door, we would say, can we shovel your driveway? And he would say, how much? And we would say, $5, and he would say, have at it. And if the woman of the house opened the door, we would say, can we shovel your driveway? And she would say, no, my husband is going to do that. She'd shut the door. We get about 100 yards away, and the door would open, and that would be the man of the house. Boys, 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 come back. And so We learned that if the woman shut the door, we'd just stand there, and 30 seconds later the door would open, and there would be the man of the house, but he wouldn't see us because we were this tall, and he was looking down the street. And when he couldn't locate us, we would learn a new word. And then we would move, and that would startle him. We would learn another new word. And so, some of you will be on the way home. And the last house we did was a little old lady. And when we were done, she invited us in, and she paid us each $5, but she paid us in pennies. We had to sit there and count out 500 pennies apiece, and the only vessel I had large enough to carry 500 pennies was a Wonder Bread bag. And if you're curious how far you can make it with 500 pennies in a Wonder Bread bag, about 300 yards. But now Skeeter had been smart enough to separate his pennies into two 250 penny piles, and then he double bagged his, so he made it home. All of that to say, Skeeter and I were well aware that the weight of American money had very little to do with the value of American money. So back to the Vacation Bible School. What Skeeter and I wanted to do most was to get into the baptismal. And I don't know why, except that we were 7 and it seemed like the right thing to do. And so whenever we could sneak away, we would go and we would be just about to get in, and the Baptist pastor would materialize behind us. He was this old guy. We didn't go to that church, but it was a small town, so we knew him. He was this old, gruff guy. I say he was old. He was probably 40. And he had this wonderful attitude about him. He really didn't care whether or not you agreed with him, because he knew that he was right. And that you would either one day come to see things his way, or you would go to hell. He was satisfied with either outcome, so... I'm not going to make a political joke, but pretend I did. And so we'd be just about to get in there, and he would say, boys, 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 I know you want to get in there, but that's not a toy. And when a man does things purely for his own enjoyment and not for the benefit of others or the glory of God, he will be stained and tainted that others may know. And we thought, that's good stuff. It doesn't make us not want to get in the baptismal, but there's no denying it's good stuff. And that pastor hated the way we were doing the offering, but any pastor worth his or her salt knows that there's only so many battles you can win, and taking on the little old ladies that run the Vacation Bible School is not a wise career move. So he wouldn't tell them to quit doing the offering that way, but by Thursday he couldn't stand it anymore. And when it came time to do the devotional, he got up to do the devotional, and he didn't read a plithy little poem. No, he got up in the pulpit and he gave a full-bore sermon. And he started by telling us the parable where Jesus is in the temple with his disciples, and they're watching people give the offering, and the rich guys are coming in and they're dumping tons and tons of cash into the offering plate. And then the little old lady comes in and she puts in her 2 mites or her 2 pennies, and Jesus turns to the disciples and he says to them, who gave the greater offering? And Mark's like, where's my red pencil? He's talking. And then so Jesus says, who gave the greater offering? And then one of the disciples give one of those answers that make me think that the reason Jesus chose those 12 guys is because he knew that they were morons. And before you get self-righteous or offended, he knew that they were morons, and he could ask them things that you and I needed to know the answers to, and they would just blurt out the first stupid thing that came into their head. Same thing you and I would do. And then Jesus could explain the right answer, and then we would know without ever opening our mouths. He was already looking out for you. And so Jesus said, who gave the greater offering? And one of the disciples says, clearly the rich men gave the greater offering. And Jesus said, no, the rich men gave from their abundance. And the word abundance, the preacher explained, the word abundance means more than you need. And when you give an offering, you're supposed to put yourself in a place where you become dependent upon God. So if you're giving what you don't need, you haven't become dependent on God, therefore you've given nothing. He said, but the little old lady gave from her poverty. She gave everything she had. Therefore, she gave the greater offering because she is now 100% dependent upon God. And just parenthetically, 2 important things. One, that is in no way a prosperity verse, so don't fall for that. And two, I say on behalf of any church treasurers in Ojai, California, if you are giving from your abundance, don't quit. It's not doing you any good, but the rest of us are benefiting. So the pastor said, the little old lady, she gave from her poverty, therefore she gave the greater offering. And then he told us that the rich men gave from their perfidy. Yeah, we didn't know what it meant either. But we thought it seemed like a weird place to keep your money. And he pointed at the scale, and he told us that if we continued to give in this perfidious way, that the demons of hell would descend, snatch our souls, and drag them down to the fiery pits of hell. And we were like, yeah. Right? Because we were Methodists. Methodists don't have demons of hell. We have covered dish dinners, and so we were like, yeah! We were moved, but again, we were not moved in the direction that the pastor had intended. It just caused Skeeter and I to remember the little old lady who had given us 1,000 pennies earlier that year, and we went home that night and we collected every penny in both of our houses. And we didn't put them in a Wonder Bread bag. We got an old wool hunting sock. And we had, I don't know how, we probably had 18 inches of pennies in that sock. Probably, 8 inches in diameter. And I'm talking pre-1983 pennies. I'm talking 174 pennies to the pound. And Skeeter kept those pennies behind his back. You're probably familiar with the idea that even the observation of an experiment can affect the outcome of the experiment. Well, the same is certainly true for a prank in church. The observation can greatly change the consequences. And so Skeeter kept those pennies behind his back, and when it came time to give the offering, he got last in line, and he was up against the wall with the pennies behind his back, and he just sort of made his way along the wall until it was his turn, and he got to the blue can, and when it was his turn, he did not gently introduce the pennies into the can. He held that tube of pennies about 10 inches above the can, and he just dropped them. And when those pennies hit the blue can, that side of the scale dropped dramatically, causing the other side of the scale to rise precipitously. And when the blue can hit the ground, the scale stopped, but the pink can didn't. It kept going, and when it got to the end of the binder's twine, binding it to the 2x4, the binder's twine just ripped, and every eye in that sanctuary watched that can sail through the sanctuary, and it hit the ceiling, and when it hit the ceiling, it didn't stop. It punched a hole right through the ceiling, and we all stood there staring at that hole. And then the demons of hell started to pour forth thousands and thousands of bats, just roiling out of the ceiling, and everyone ran for their lives. Everyone ran from the sanctuary, clutching their souls tightly to their chest, everyone. But Skeeter and myself, because we knew that this was our chance. And we went straight for the baptismal. And we didn't stop to look, we just put our hands on the side and we vaulted. And when we had gone just far enough that we could no longer halt our forward progression, when we were nothing now but slaves to Newton's first law, body in motion tends to stay in motion, which is very similar to Skeeter's first law, which is a body being chased by the law tends to stay in motion. But when all we could do is fly a little further forward and fall, we looked down and we saw that someone, some unknown person, had dyed the water red. So a few minutes later, when we joined the rest of the kids on the front lawn of the church, we were limping and dripping and dyed pink. We heard a voice behind us that said, "Boys, when a man does things purely for his own enjoyment, not for the benefit of others or the glory of God, he will be stained and tainted that others may know."
Well, Lord have mercy. Oh, well, we're in for a treat. Our next teller is a honey-voiced sweetheart of a teller. And she's been to Ojai before, and you've loved her, and you're going to love her this time. Please welcome Kim Whitecap.
Hello, hi. You guys are troopers, man. You're hanging in there. It's good to see you. Thank you. You're so sweet. Give her a round. They're awesome here. They really are. Well, you know what? I found myself single after 30 years of marriage. And that is a rough place to find yourself when you're headed into your 50s and your body is at clearance rack level. I had no desire to date again. I never wanted to marry again. I said it. I would never get married again. My first marriage, when I divorced him, his family sent me congratulations cards. My kids wept with joy, and I'm not kidding. Everybody was happy. And so was I, and I'm like, I'm never getting married again. And so I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, rented an apartment in the basement of a folk musician's house, and lived life so wild because I could do whatever I wanted. I'd stay up till 2 listening to Icelandic music, reading Robert Service poetry. It was a great time. But something began to happen. This freedom that I thought was going to be amazing after 30 years, being able to do what I wanted when I wanted, I thought it would be enough, but I found myself becoming lonely. And I started thinking about adopting cats. And I was always wanting to buy house plants and surround myself with cats and house plants, and I thought I am on a dangerous path of either becoming a knitter or a librarian. And so I thought something has to happen. So I was coming home from time away from doing gigs, and I pulled off into an overlook down before you head into Asheville that I love. And I got out my journal, and I went to the top part where there's just beautiful rolling mountains of North Carolina. And I had a one-on-one with God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. And I was like, look, so it didn't work that first time. I gave it the good try. I'm a golden retriever in love. I was doing a gig somewhere and I said that, and some guy yells, "No, you're a slow learner." And I said, so I'm just coming and I'm just saying, look, I'm not doing well being alone, but if you're going to bring me somebody, you need to walk them right up to me, because I'm not dating. Because I will instantly fall for the first dysfunctional human that comes my way. I am a fixer, and that's how it is. So I'm going to make a list for you of what I want, and I will not compromise, and I want you to walk it right up to me, and that's the only way I'll move into another relationship. Well, I was in Culpeper, Virginia, and I had a couple shows that weekend. And during the intermission of one of the shows, a guy walks up to the CD table and he buys every one of my CDs. And then he asked me to dinner. And I looked at him and I said, if you think that buying all of my CDs is going to make me go to dinner with you, you're absolutely correct. And I said to him, look, I said, seriously, I'm not available. And he said, well, I don't see a ring. I said, look, I'm coming out of 30 years. I've got a lot of baggage. I'm under repair. And this man leaned forward and said, well, I always heard it's good to fix something with the help of two people. Ooh. I said, well, okay, fine. I said, but I need to alert you that the undercarriage is locked. And he said, excuse me? I said, the undercarriage is locked. And he said, who talks like that? I said, I do. And he threw his head back and laughed. I mean, it came from deep inside. He wasn't laughing at me. He was just full of joy from the conversation. The laughter crept up his cheek, wrinkled the side of his eyes, and that's when I knew I was in trouble. How many of you know that a man that can make you laugh or who laughs easily is the sexiest thing in the world? And so I just kind of was like, no, and he walked away and it was done. Well, the next day he came back to the next show. I walked out on stage, they introduced me, I walked out on stage and I saw him dead center, and I'm thinking, oh, great. the whole show, I'm like trying to suck it in, stand sideways, look good. I'm like, this is torture. And when I was done, I walked off stage, and before I could even get off stage, before the applause even died down, he was out and standing at the edge of the stage. And I was like, this guy is crazy. I was watching from backstage. And so I walked out and I said, look, what are you doing? And he said, I'm not leaving till you come to dinner with me. And I said, fine. I said, I'll go to dinner with you. I said, I need your driver's license. I'm going to take a picture of your license plate. I want to know your information. I'm going to send it to my sister. And if she doesn't hear from me in 2 hours, she's coming in. So we went to dinner and we shut the place down, and it was great. And then we went our separate ways. He lived 4 hours away from me. He's in West Virginia. And he said, you know, we're just going to have to talk by phone. For a long time, we talked by phone, almost 2.5 months, and it was a beautiful way to court. And he said, look, if you're ever up my way on your travels, why don't you just pop in? Well, it just so happened that I was going onto the road again, and I was going to be really near him, about 3 hours away. And I called him and I said, hey, I'm going to be pretty close to you. And I said, why don't I come visit? I said, I think it's time. And he said, I would love that. Well, he had built a beautiful cedar-sided home on top of Sandstone Mountain, just absolutely beautiful. And as I pulled in, I was like, all right, this is lovely. And I got out, and he came out, and he said, man, you look good. And I said, thank you. He said, like a 2-pound woman in a 1-pound bag. That's my favorite line tonight. And I said, thank you. And he said, listen, did you bring comfortable clothes? I said, well, yeah. I said, I got stuff in the car because I got a whole piece of luggage full of stuff. He goes, well, put it on. And I said, okay. So I went in the house and I put it on. He asked me if I needed a drink. And I said, no. He said, well, we're going to go outside. He said, did you see my truck? I said, yeah. He said, did you see the mulch in there? And I said, well, yeah, I did see that. And he goes, we're going to lay mulch. And I said, what? He said, we're going to lay mulch. He said, the whole front of my property needs mulched. And he said, I want to get the flower beds looking good and things. It's getting to that season. He said, so I thought you could help me. And I was like, okay. So that's what we did. Our first date together at his house, we laid mulch. And you know, at the end of the night, we were sitting on the back of the pickup truck, and we were each having a cold beer, and I thought that was really, actually a lot of fun. And he said, well, what did you think? I said, about what? He said, about laying the mulch. I said, well, you know, it wasn't so bad. He said, good, good. That's the way of my people up here. He said, up on this mountain, we have to work. And I said, well, okay, that's great, that's fine. Well, I left the next day, and about 3 weeks later, I went back. I called him, I said, look, I'm going to be a little closer this time, 2 hours. And I said, I'd like to pop in again. He said, great. He said, now look, he said, I'm really busy down on the property, so if you don't see me or hear me or I don't come to the door, go around back, there's a bell, and I'll be able to hear it wherever I'm at. And I said, okay, that's fine. So I pulled in the driveway, and I didn't see him anywhere, and then I went up and knocked on the door. There was no answer, and so I went around back, and sure enough, there was a bell, and I rang it. And I heard, I'm down in the garden. He had cleared a path through the woods and then opened up a 1/4 acre, and there was a stunning garden. So I went down the path to the garden, and I was like, hip, hoppity, hip, hop, hip, hop, hip, hop, hip, hip, hop. I'm going to the vegetable patch, gonna catch me a man. Well, I got down there, and sure enough, there he was, barefoot in the garden. So sexy. Barefoot in the garden, on his knees, planting, and around the garden were flats and flats and flats and flats of little plants. And when I came out of the woods into the clearing of the garden, he looked at me and he said, oh, you look good. He said, did you bring comfortable clothing? And I said, what? He said, did you bring comfortable clothing? And I said, yes. I said, I got a whole luggage full of comfortable clothing. He goes, good. He said, put it on. You can help me plant all of these plants. And so that time, I helped him plant a whole garden. And when we were done, we cleaned up, and we were sitting there having a nice meal, and he said, well, what did you think? I said, about what? He said, about planting plants in the garden. I said, it was fine. He said, good, good. That's the way of my people. Well, I left his house and I called my sister Holly and I said, look, something's up. I said, every time I visit this guy, he makes me work. She goes, oh, he's testing you. I said, what? She said, he is testing you. I said, she said, you told me he lives on a mountain, 20,000 acres of untouched woodland. He's fully self-sustained, so fully self-sufficient up there. She said, he must really like you because he's testing you. I said, oh, all right, good to know. Well, the next time I went back, I pulled in and there was 2 trucks, and in the back were stones, the little stones that made up his driveway, that long mile driveway. And I saw to myself, 3 tests. I must be in the story of an unimaginative storyteller. Well, I went up and knocked on the door, and he said, come in, and I went in, and his neighbor Jim was there, a neighbor by miles away. And I said, let me guess, do I have to put on comfortable clothing? He said, no, no, no. He said, we're good. He said, you're just going to drive the trucks, we're going to push it out and spread it, and we're just going to tell you to go stop, go stop. So that was that whole thing. I think he was checking to see if I followed directions well. And that night we cleaned up, we were getting ready to have dinner, and he said, look, I have a question for you. And I said, yeah. He said, what did you think of? I said, no, 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 no. I said, don't ask me what I thought about today. I said, because I want to talk to you. Actually, so I want to sing to you. I said, I wrote you a song. He said, you wrote me a song? I said, yeah, I wrote you a song. I said, just my visits here have just touched me. And I said, I wrote you a song. He's like, well, that's just the sweetest thing ever. I said, well, let me sing it to you. I thought I was your only darling, silly me. I stopped by without warning, silly me. Well, I guess I should have phoned. I knew that you were home. I thought you'd be alone, silly me. I ignored Becky's Ford, silly me. Walked right up to your door, silly me. Well, I guess I should have knocked. Was I in for a shock? Oh, it was a shock, silly me. Silly me, oh silly me. I guess I lost touch with reality. To think someone like you could ever love a fool like silly, silly me. Well, I must have lost my head, silly me. I went and shot you dead, silly me. Thought I was justified. They called it homicide, and tomorrow they will fry, silly me. Silly me, oh silly me. I guess I lost touch with reality. To think someone like you could ever love a fool like silly, silly me. Oh, a fool, yeah, like silly, silly me. And I looked at him and I said, well, what'd you think? He said, well, that's a pretty aggressive song. I said, well, that's the way of my people. And I said, as long as you understand that, we're going to get along real well. 7 years. Thank you for having me. Thanks for hanging in there. It's a long night.
One of those things was called self-esteem. And since it had not been invented, it did not need to be taken care of. So when we got in trouble as little kids, do you think we got put in time out? No, time out would have just been a nice quiet place where you could think up more trouble to get into. When we got in trouble, do you think we got grounded? No, no, no. When we got in trouble at home, we got a flat out, uncaged, free-range whooping. But at school it was different. At school, if you got in trouble, you got a paddling. You see, there's a legal difference. If you got a paddling at school, the teacher could later stand up in court and truthfully swear, I didn't lay a finger on that child. The paddle did it. But every teacher I ever had at Hazelwood School taught with the help of a paddle. In the first grade in Miss Annie Ledbetter's room, she taught with a red flyback paddle. The flyback paddles were manufactured for the teaching profession by the Flyback Toy Corporation in High Point, North Carolina, and they came disguised as toys. They looked like little red wooden paddles, about 12 inches long, and on the middle of one side, there was a long rubber band stapled in the middle with a little rubber ball on the other end of it. And you would practice that, trying to knock that little ball back, just like that, over and over and over again, so it wouldn't hit you in the eye coming the other way. Little Eddie Curtis got one of those for his birthday, and he brought it to school hidden in his little book satchel. Miss Annie Ledbetter was doing arithmetic on the board, and in the back of the room, Eddie was playing with his flyback paddle. He did not see her coming. She slipped up behind him, lifted that paddle, popped the rubber band off of it, and recycled it on the spot. And for the rest of her teaching career, that paddle slept on the corner of her desk, ready to sit up when he heard the right tone of voice. But you know, right there in the first grade, we learned pretty soon that most of us didn't have anything to worry about. Because you see, the way the world was made back then, every class of kids had installed within it about 2 or 3 designated paddlees whose role in life was to get paddled for the rest of us. And in our class, we were the A's through the GRs, Charlotte Abernathy through Lady Ruth Green. The designated paddlees were Aldine Conard, his cousin Tommy. They were already genetically related. And this wispy little barely there boy named Lynn Fowler. I got to tell you about Lynn. Lynn Fowler had 7 brothers, 8 boys in that family. And even though there were only 6 grades at Hazelwood School, not once, but every year, all 8 of those boys would start at Hazelwood School. And then as the year rolled along, gradually, one at a time, they would disappear. And we would hear the mythology. Another one has been transported to the Stonewall Jackson School for evil boys, where they would be sent down in the middle of North Carolina and put together with other evil boys from all over the state of North Carolina so they could spend the rest of the year exchanging evil information with each other and be a whole lot worse when they got back home than they were when they got. That was a dumb thing to do now, wasn't it? Well, every day Miss Annie Ledbetter paddled one of those 3 boys. She'd paddle Tommy on Monday. She'd paddle Aldine on Tuesday. She'd paddle Lynn on Wednesday. She'd get back to Tommy again on Thursday. On Friday, she'd just paddle all 3 of them because she was going to miss a weekend she knew they needed anyway. Well, finally we finished the first grade, and the whole same group of kids, A through GR, we moved right up to the 2nd grade, and our teacher that year was old. That was her first name, old Miss Lois Harrell. That woman was profoundly old. She existed on the outer fringes of absolute dehydration. The only thing that kept her on the face of the earth was a great big jug of Jergens lotion that she rubbed into herself all the time to try to swell the wrinkles up so the wind wouldn't catch her by the wrinkles and blow her away when it came through. She told us she had taught 2nd grade for 178 years, and that was after she taught all the other grades to find out where she really belonged. Well, Miss Lois Harrell had the one and only in the world, electric paddle. It had been made for her by her boyfriend, Harry. Better tell you about Harry. In a previous era, Harry had been slated to marry Miss Lois Harold. But before the wedding came along, the First World War started, and Harry went off to fight the Germans. And in about 2 months' time, he discovered that fighting Germans was a better deal than getting married to Miss Lois Harold. So he just kept signing up and signing up and signing up. And he stayed through the army through 2.5 wars, but then it was too late to get married. But every night he would go over to her house. She would cook supper. They would eat together. They would wash the dishes together. And then he would go home and sleep where it was safe. Well, I finally figured out later what he had done was he had taken a 3/4 inch board. He cut out the shape of a paddle. He painted it red, but on one side there was this explosive logo like what used to pop up when you're watching Batman on television. And then he bored a hole in the handle and glued a big cord in there and just put a plug on the other end. And that paddle would be there on her desk with its tail all curled up, and she would pick it up and its tail would uncurl, and she would say, "Boys and girls, I'm going to be kind today and use it by hand. But if you continue to behave this way, I will be forced to plug it in." And we had heard stories from 5th and 6th graders about the year when she plugged it in and a little child disappeared totally from the face of the earth and without even leaving grease on the ground, and his family never remembered that he ever even existed. Well, we went all along through that year. We got up to the springtime, and one day, she was getting ready to paddle Tommy. Now, she'd already put a big glob of Jergens lotion on her hands and it hadn't all soaked in yet. And she got hold of that paddle and started in on Tommy, and about the time she hit 78 RPM, all of a sudden that paddle just squirted right out of her hand. And it went flying through the air across the room, and it hit the big old schoolhouse window, and the window shattered, and dragging its tail behind it with the plug on the end, that whole paddle went out the window and landed on the sidewalk just as Mr. Bowles, the superintendent, was coming to see Mr. Leatherwood, our principal. The rest of the day was very interesting. In about 5 minutes, Miss Lois Harold was called out. And we had an instant substitute. Haskell Davis, the janitor, who told us wonderful stories about blood, boogers, and throw up. Oh, it was great. Well, the bell rang and we went home, and the next day we got back to school, and as soon as we got there, Miss Lois Harold told us we were going to have an unannounced all-school assembly. And we got up and marched into the auditorium, got down in our little second grade seats, and there on the stage, it was both Mr. Bowles and Mr. Leatherwood. Ooh, this was important. And they got up and they began to explain to us that the day before, after school, they'd had a special teacher workshop on discipline. Imagine that timing. And there would be no more paddling at Hazelwood School. About 2 or 3 kids in each room applauded. Rest of us just thought we'd lost our entertainment. And they went on to explain that there was this new thing that had been developed that they were trying all over the country, and they were now going to try it at Hazelwood School. It was called getting suspended. And there were 2 versions of getting suspended. Mr. Leatherwood explained the misdemeanor version. He had a little list of wrongdoings, and they weren't really horribly bad, but if you did any of those things, you were going to get what was called suspended in school, where you'd be put in a room with all the other kids who were suspended in school, and a teacher would be in there watching all of you. And then Mr. Bowles explained the felony level. It was bad. It included things like fighting on the school bus, with the driver, stealing lunch money, changing grades on your report card if you made them better, or calling a teacher the same thing you'd already heard your parents call them. If you did any of those things, you were flat suspended out of school by yourself. And then the assembly was over, and we went back to our room. Well, Miss Lois Harrell said, "Now, children, did you understand all of that?" We said, "Yes, no more paddling." She says, "That's true, but you know you are still evil. And if you do the wrong thing instead of getting paddled, you are going to get suspended. Do you have one single question about that?" Every one of us looked at Eddie Curtis. Eddie Curtis was like one of the disciples of Jesus. He would ask the questions the rest of us were ashamed to ask. And little Eddie raised his hand and he said, "Miss Lois, what does suspended mean?" Well, being a good second grade teacher, you know what she did. She did not answer the question. No, she said that most evil of all things. Go look it up. Didn't you hate that? You didn't know how to spell a word. How are you going to look it up if you don't know how to spell it to start with? I remember spending half a day hung up between C and K trying to find ketchup in the dictionary. I never could find it. Well, Eddie walked over to this big 35-pound maroon-colored New Century Dictionary. Miss Lois Harrell had brought it home a month at a time from the A&P store in sections, and then it was bolted together. And he started looking through there. He got over to S. He was looking at the guide words. S-U, S-U-S. Here he went. All of a sudden, he went stiff and his eyes rolled back and he went, "Jesus, Joseph, and Mary, they're going to hang us." He said, "If we're just a little bit bad, they're going to put us in a room with everybody just a little bit bad and hang everybody in there together with a teacher watching. And if you're real bad, they're going to take you off out of school and hang you off by yourself." No, 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 no. 2 days later, in the Waynesville Mountaineer newspaper, little 4-page, twice-a-week county seat newspaper, the following headline appeared on the bottom half of the front page. It said, 28 second graders petition school board to reestablish paddling as their favorite form of punishment. Thank you for coming. See you tomorrow.
You thought tonight was great. Tomorrow's going to be even better. Thank you so much for coming. And we'll see you all tomorrow. We love you. You are magnificent. And let's give everybody a big hand, including yourself.